Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the Wilson Center, those of you here in the audience and those who are joining us online. My name is Oge Onubogu, and I'm the director of the Africa program. Delighted to welcome you to this special conversation today on policing in Africa, imperatives for peacebuilding. This conversation is part of our Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding program. The Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding, or SVNP, is a continent-wide network of 22 African policy research and academic organizations that work with the Wilson Center's Africa program to bring African knowledge and perspectives to U.S., African, and international policy on peacebuilding in Africa. Today, I'm delighted that our SVNP scholar, Mr. Meressa Kahsu Dessu, will present his research where he will discuss the need for a stronger and more unified continental police organization within the African Union to mitigate ongoing, emerging, and new security challenges across the continent. Mr. Dessu is a senior researcher and training coordinator at the Institute for Security Studies based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. He works closely with the African Union, with different regional economic bodies, and also explores regional mechanisms and does some ongoing research on African states and supports African states that are working on efforts to support peace operations and peace building across the continent. He has worked on several years in analyzing these issues, and has published various articles and papers on peace building, security, and international affairs in Africa. Meressa is a PhD candidate in international politics at the University of South Africa. I'm also delighted today that Dr. Nate Allen, who is an associate professor at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies here in Washington, D.C., is joining the panel to provide comments on Meressa's research. Nate Allen oversees academic programming on cyber issues and peace operations at ACSS. His expertise includes cyber issues, emerging technology, civil-military relations, and regional security partnerships across Africa. Previously, Dr. Allen was a policy advisor at the U.S. Institute of Peace Task Force on Extremism in Fragile States. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Meressa, who is going to speak for about 10 minutes or less on his research, and then we'll turn it over to Nate to provide some comments, and we'll open it up to the audience here in the room and those online for questions and comments. So Meressa, turn it over to you.
Thank you again. Good afternoon. I also would like to thank you for coming to this event. And those of you online as well, I thank you very much and I appreciate it. My topic, as Oge mentioned, is policing Africa vis-a-vis peace building. It includes peace, security, and governance. The issue of policing is an essential for stability and development, but it is often overlooked in the policy debate, dialogues, also in the academic discourses as well. So I know this one, it is the elephant in the room, but I would like to touch some facts that gives ways maybe for further discussions on policing Africa. My argument is clear that the African Union needs a stronger, unified police organization to steer coordination, cooperation among African states so that tackle the key challenges in the continent, including crime and conflict in the continent. So I will touch on some aspects from my research, One is I will have some concepts on the policing aspect, and then some assessments on the African Union police, and the challenges, and also the rationales why I'm arguing that the African Union needs a stronger police institution, or I will call it the supranational police institution. And finally, I will conclude by providing key pointers for policy considerations. So to start with the concept, the policing as the UN defines is a function of governance, responsible for prevention, investigation, detection of crime, and protection of people and properties, and maintaining law, order, and safety. So those are services, governance services that everyone wants to have always across the world, across the board, the globe. Whenever we are, we need these services. And those services are the primary services of governance. So every governance is responsible to provide these services everywhere. So they are the primary obligations of any government to provide. Also, this policing aspect is basically local. In approach, it's local, but in scope, it is international. You can find the policing everywhere. So in every country, the service of policing is everywhere. And also, policing is an area or key area of international cooperation. Maybe if you can see the histories back to last 1 century, you can find policing as a key area of international cooperation. You can take the Interpol with 196 member countries today are cooperating on policing aspects. How effective it is, we can have more discussion on this, but as an area of cooperation, it is a global cooperation. Policing is an area of global cooperation. Again, on the concept of policing, we consider policing, I'm talking about policing, the civilian police, the community-oriented policing. I'm not talking about the paramilitary police or the military police. I'm talking about the police that serves to the community, that considers, that applies community policing as a strategy to serve the people. Meaning, when I say community policing, I'm touching about 5 elements. That is problem-solving policing, partnership, accountability, also empowerment of the people, empowerment. So it's community policing about partnering with the people, serving to the people, and living with the people. So this is the concept that I put in my mind that when I talk about policing Africa. So to come to the point where I'm talking about the African Union has 2 structures, architectures. One is the peace and security architecture. In short, we call it the APSA. The other is the Africa governance architecture. We call, in short, this is the AGA. So within these structures, where is the policing fit in? In the APSA, the Africa Peace and Security Architecture, there is a police element. Under the Africa Standby Force, you can find it as a component of the Africa Standby Force. Again, in the AU interventions in peace support operations, police is a component in AU interventions in peace support operations and peace building. But it is unfortunate that police is not part of the AGA or the Africa governance architectures. But policing, the AGA, the Africa governance architecture is dealing with human rights, dealing with governance, dealing with election. And if you see the functions of police, they are related to human rights, related to democracy, related to freedom, But so it could have been as part of the AGA, but unfortunately it's not in that part. Again, it's not as part of the AGA or a part of the APSA, but the African Union established an African Union mechanism for police coordination that is continental. In short, it is AFRIPOL in 2018 by statute. And this office is based in Algeria. And more than, I think, all member countries, all Africans are members to this organization, Continental Police Organization. But there are challenges. When we look at those structures, there are various challenges. The challenges, we can categorize them as strategic challenge and tactical, technical challenges. On the strategic challenge, one, it has structural challenge. As you can see, there is no one unified policy structure within the African Union Commission. There is AFRIPOL, okay, I said based in Algeria. Okay, and the police elements within the Africa Standby Force, within peace support operation, but no one is on top or coordinating these elements. So that is a structural challenge. Second challenge, strategic challenge is the police in general has less contributions in decision-making processes. So you cannot find the police elements in the key strategic decision-making processes within the African Union, in the APSA or in any places. Like the African Standby Force, they have a policy organ. So within the policy organ, you cannot find the police within the policy organ. In fact, the policy is at the operational and tactical levels. They are not on the strategic level. To solve these problems, the African Union Assembly adopted a policy on international policing for peace support operations and special operations in 2018. But this policy has a provisions that asks for establishment of a police, a chief of police advisors at the African Union Commission level, and to appoint a chief police advisor and substantive staff. And also not only the policy, also with independent assessments led by Professor Gambare on the Africa Standby Force. He recommends 2 times in 2013 and 2017, 2 times to assign a police chief advisors at the AU Commission, but all this remains on papers. We didn't see promising steps to establish this office and appoint the advisors and substantive staff. Those are the strategic challenges. And on the tactical level, if you see the AFRIPOL, one, it has a capacity challenges, serious capacity challenges. The plan was at least to have 37 core staff and about 46 seconded officers from member countries. But currently, to my knowledge, it has only 5 core staff out of 37. You can see the difference, and about 8 seconded officers from a few member countries. So it is understaffed totally. And second, it is highly dependent on the international financing. So it is Interpol, Germany, and Europol supports this office. So it is maybe I would not say fully, but it is highly dependent on international financing. And the third one is also in terms of accessibility. It is far from many of African countries. So it is far from the center. So it is issue of accessibility is also an issue. So there is a lack of understanding even for member countries being far from disengaged from the AU headquarters, sitting far from that one. So maybe in terms of communication, it has also some sort of challenges. Again, the policing element within the peace support operations in the Africa Standby Force, there are planning elements, yes. I'm talking about at the AE headquarters. There are few planning elements. To my knowledge, it's about 5 police planning elements within the peace and security, peace support operation division. And then these are substantive, within the substantive structures, but they don't have that type of integration or coordination among themselves. So they just have, they don't have, someone just, by structure to coordinate their activities. Again, those policing elements do not have direct communications with member countries. So like if they want information or communicate with member countries, police organizations, the communication channels goes a long way to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to defense channels. So it takes, like, for example, after a month or 2 months, it takes maybe to reach the member countries. So they don't have direct communications with member states. So that communication is also a technical challenge. Well, capacity, I mentioned it, this one. Well, what are those problems? Like, there is a policy already adopted by the Assembly. Means the Assembly is the highest decision-making organ of the Union. So why is not implementing the policy? Why is not the office was not established? Why was not the police advisors and other substantive staffs were not appointed? This is a question, but to my assessment, I got like, one is the awareness problem. There's a lack of awarenesses, and then they see the policing as a very local business, so they didn't see the importance of policing at the top level, at that level. And also the perception is, okay, the military can do it, or the other peoples can do it, the policing aspect. So they see the policing as someone can do it on behalf of the police, which is wrong. And the other problem is it's about championship. There is no a police organization or police chief or as a country to take a lead to steer these implementations of this policy. So it's an issue of championship. If one country, like, for example, from South Africa or Nigeria police chief, okay, take these initiatives, I think it could have been implemented, because the Assembly already says, okay, we need this one, but since no one is taking this one to implement, that is the problem that I see. Okay, then all in all, I said at the beginning, my argument is the AU needs a stronger, unified police, supranational police. And I say this, there are at least 3 reasons to mention. One is the AU is getting more responsibilities to tackle with problems related to conflict, problems related to crimes. With the polarized global governance, the appetite to support Africa is declining. So the AU's role is increasing. In fact, for the last 20 years, it comes a long way to deploy more than 27, 28 peace support operations in Africa. And also there is the starting to tackle the transnational organized crimes by establishing the AFRIPOL. But it needs more structure. So that is the reason, one reason, maybe the first reason that I would mention. The second one is in Africa, the issue of crisis related to conflict is going up, and the issue of transnational organized crime is also going up. The crime index, the transnational organized crime index of 2023 shows that crime increased for the last 5 years. Organized crime increased for the last 5 years, while the resilience of the countries to react or to prevent this remains very low. So you can see the resilience to prevent and combat, and then the growing threats or problems of crimes. And on the conflict side, again, the trend shows for the last 30 years, conflict is going up sharp increasing. Like in 1989, there was 34 conflicts in Africa. But by 2022, the conflict is 104 conflicts. So if you can see in percent, it is more than 300% increasing the conflicts in Africa. So you can see the instability in Africa is high. So the African Union has responsibility to respond to this one. So it needs a well-structured, capable police organization to tackle these problems. The third reason, and the most important reason, is this. The African Union has a Pan-African vision, and to implement the Pan-African vision, it adopts Agenda 2063. The Agenda 2063, and one of the aspirations among the agenda, is to see Africa secure and peaceful, and to the extent that to make a conflict-free and crime-free continent, which is very promising, and then happy just to read this statement. Yes. So how is going to do this one? Even to implement this one, the African Union establishes the continental free trade areas, which is already in implementation, and also the Africa signs the protocol on free movement of people and goods. So when we implement this one, it adds more challenges to Africa. So unless there is a structure in place to tackle with those types of problems. So with these three reasons, I'm arguing that the African Union needs a stronger police institutions. Okay, so how can be done this one? So I have a pointers for policy considerations. I have 2 pointers to the African Union Commission. One, establish the Chief of Police Advisor's Office. That helps a lot. One, it can serve as an advisor to the Commission. Second, it coordinates policing aspect across the continent. And third, also it helps like on the governance aspect to be as part of the monitoring, observing missions in Africa closely with the African Union. And I can add more. Second, to the African Union, include the African police chiefs on strategic decision-making processes. Like when there is agendas, the African police chiefs must be part of the discussions and part of the decision-making. They are not only the implementers, but they should be part of the discussions and the policy decision-making process. And 2 points for the member countries, African member countries. One, they need to reform the police organizations. Reform the police organizations to be one, independent, non-partisan, and to be a public-centered, service-oriented organizations. Those are because the African member countries, they already signed the Charter on Governance, Election, and Democratization. Is one of the elements in this charter is about enhancing democratic institutions, and the policy is one of the democratic institutions. So reform in a way to support democracy in Africa. And the second point to the member countries is assign police liaison officers to the African Union Commission. In their embassies, you cannot find a police liaison officer or police attaché. Some countries, they send police advisor, like South Africa. they send about 37 police attaches or police liaison officers in embassies abroad. And South Africa is leading on the Pan-African issues and on the Agenda 2063. But South Africa don't have police liaison officers at its embassies close to the headquarters of the African Union. And others are like that. So these liaison officers creates more integrations among the African states. They can share best practices. They can create forums. They can have a peer review mechanisms, and also they facilitate communications between the AU and the member countries. And then one point to the international community, I mean international partners, particularly to the US. That is partnership. Partnership, the problems in Africa will not remain in Africa. They are the flames to everyone. So, and then the partnership to tackle on this problem is an essential. Specific to the US, they have engagements with African member countries, I know, and the studies show that since 2000, the US established a regional training center, like in Botswana, and they train law enforcement officers from various countries in Africa. To my knowledge, to the minority that I read, it's about 8,000 law enforcement officers was trained from about 34 member countries from Africa at the law enforcement academy in Botswana. But this engagement is at local level. Also, to my knowledge, the US have engagements with, at the African Union level, more on strategic, like financing AUP support operations. But there is no specific engagements within the African Union on the policing aspect. So my recommendation to the US is, let's uplift the engagements at the country level to the AU, so that having the stronger African Union police can coordinate and can have a multiplier effect, a multiplier impact on policing Africa. I think those are the points I would like to say. Let me stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much, Meressa. Thank you so much. Turn over to Nate.
Thank you very much. A welcome to both our colleagues online and in person that are joining us today. It's an honor to be here. And I'd like to commend Meressa on a really rich and highly informative policy brief on improving the regional police architecture in Africa. I was honored to have the opportunity to read an advanced copy to kind of help inform my remarks, and I highly encourage you all to take a look at the report when it comes out. There's a lot of rich, new material with, I think, a lot of very forward-thinking recommendations that ought to be adopted in this brief. I'm going to spend my time today kind of briefly reacting to what Meressa just said, highlight a couple other kind of challenges I see to improving the African Union approaches to policing, and then make a couple of recommendations that I think are largely synergistic with what Meressa has put on the table. So, first and foremost, one of the great things about this brief, it highlights not just that policing is crucial to addressing internal armed conflict. I think that's something that maybe a lot of people who follow closely the conflict in Africa understand, that most conflicts are internal. Therefore, having police to address a lot of the underlying causes, to be first responders, to prevent small disputes from becoming big is really, really important. But I think Meressa's policy brief makes a really strong case that Africa needs a better continental level policing response, really to address the transnational aspects of Africa's security challenges, from cross-border armed conflict to emerging threats like cybercrime and cybersecurity, which is an area I know well. So, like, for example, there's one estimate out there that cybercrime costs as much as 10% of African GDP, and because most cyber threat actors that African countries are facing are external to their borders, some kind of regional and international cooperation is absolutely needed to address that kind of threat. So you can really see how in this brief, policing really is no longer a local matter. Second, Meressa highlights the Africa's formal architecture for effective cooperation in policing. While I think there's a convincing case that this is not adequate, what is interesting is I think it exists, it's growing. There's actually a lot of good, I think, ideas that are already there, from AFRIPOL, the AU mechanism on police cooperation, to the African Standby Force, to a 200-page policy that he mentions, which I've read, on the AU policy for international peacing and peace support operations and special operations. The problem, and third, kind of with, well, all this, I think, formal architecture is nice, and there are all these great ideas about how to improve it, such as having a police commissioner or police advisor sit at African unit headquarters, is that there's not very much meat on the bones. The actual impact and implementation leaves a lot to be desired. As Meressa mentioned, it was really striking to see that only, I think, 16% of the planned staff at this secretariat exist out of 100 staff, which isn't that much. This policing policy was written in 2018, and I still think, and Meressa, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only two African-led peace support operations to actively have police assigned to them, even though you have these planning units, are the peace operations in Somalia and Darfur, which were both UN funded, so I think probably benefited from UN capacity in supporting the police forces assigned to those missions is there. So even though this really nice 200-page policy exists on paper, we have yet to see it actually have any kind of practical effect on the kinds of peace operations that the AU is managing. And then finally, as Meressa nicely laid out, this formal architecture really isn't functioning. There are two additional challenges, I think, to establishing a robust international police architecture I'd like to lay out on the table, too, as well, that were mentioned a little bit by Meressa. First, police themselves are often not the most trusted institutions in Africa. According to an Afrobarometer survey, fewer than half the respondents in 39 countries expressed trust in the police. This is because police often abuse their power, be it between repressing the political opposition in places like Zimbabwe and Uganda, crushing largely peaceful protests in Nigeria's case against police brutality, to kind of routine demands. I mean, I think anybody who has spent any significant time in Africa has been kind of shaken up for a bribe by a security sector official, be it a police or a military force, just very, very common. Kind of moreover, Africa's political leaders or senior officials themselves are at times implicated in the very kinds of organized criminal activities that organizations like AFRIPOL and Interpol are attempting to stop. And Interpol explicitly does not deal with state-backed crime for this very reason. For example, regional authorities in Jubaland are facilitating the illegal charcoal trade, which helps fuel the Al-Shabaab insurgency. Guinea-Bissau, which has made some improvement, was dubbed Africa's first narco state for its complicity in the drug trafficking trade. So these are significant challenges, but they're not insurmountable, and I think we should not discount some of the progress that has been made in founding up some of these mechanisms at the regional level. So I'd just like to kind of add my voice to Merissa's and talk about three ways forward. So kind of first and foremost, like we are now talking about with the existing formal architecture, I think we should be saying that Africa's police architecture needs adequate, predictable, and sustainable funding. And while I do think, certainly some donor support is needed, maybe, as Meressa alluded to, we should be talking about funding some kind of police cooperation alongside or as a complement to the recent UN resolution that was passed allowing the UN to support African-led peace operations. I also think it's reasonable to expect Africans themselves to put money on the table to support their own police architecture. I don't think it is insurmountable to assume that African Union or member states, through voluntary contributions for the Peace Fund, through some kind of tax, can't support a policing architecture, especially of 100 staff. By contrast, the Europol, the European police organization, has over 1,000. So I think it's reasonable to expect 54 countries, even if they are middle-income, low-income countries, to be able to fund some level of staff in ADIS to be able to do this. For external partners and donors, I would also say I think I would like to see most attention voted to getting existing initiatives started or improving what's already out there, rather than often kind of duplicative bilateral initiatives. I think that I think Meressa laid out, I think they're actually between AFRIPOL, between the African Standby Force, between this policing policy. There are good bones that are in place. Maybe it needs to be centralized and consolidated, but I think the attention really needs to be at consolidating coordination and cooperation at the regional level, both informally and formally through the AU, but also through, as you mentioned, maybe reforming some of the existing kind of informal, like West African or East African police networks and having them attached to the African Union. And then kind of third and finally, going back to my two challenges, I don't think I think that there needs to also be a focus, even as we do some work at the international level, there needs to be a focus on professionalizing African police and the justice sector as well. I don't think you can have one without the other. And I will highlight especially not only the police, but the justice sector as a critical gap. You can't effectively prosecute criminals without having a functioning independent judiciary in place, without having detention facilities, without having justices who understand the law and can use things like digital forensic evidence that police are increasingly collecting. So I think that both internally and externally there needs to be more of a focus on professionalizing not just militaries, but police and judiciaries. I'll end there, and I look forward to a robust half hour of conversation.
Thank you very much, Nate, and thank you, Meressa. Both of you have laid out some really good points here, really good points for conversation. I think increasingly, or very often when we talk about the police, we say it's a community-led process, this is a local initiative, and on the continent, there's so many local security issues that citizens are concerned about on a daily basis. But both of you have also laid out the argument that we can't do one, or we shouldn't be doing one without the other. We should pay attention to professionalizing the police forces and ensuring that they respond to the local needs of society, but then we should also be aware that a lot of the crimes and insecurity that we see on the continent are also they go across borders. So we should think about the international approach too as well. So thank you so much for laying out those points. I'm gonna open it up for conversation, questions, comments. Please, I encourage you in the room, if you have a question, there's a mic in front of you, ask a question, your name, identify where you're from, and please keep your question to a question so we have enough time to take comments from the audience. Okay, let me go with you first. Can you turn the microphone?
Oh, sorry, I apologize, yeah. So I'm curious to know, could you talk about, how the Kenya police went to Haiti? I think they went there for a mission, but I never heard anything from you guys about Kenya and why they're allowed to go to outside of technically Africa. I mean, Haiti is part of African Union now, but still. How were they selected? I'm very curious to know. And also, could you speak about overcrowding of prisons? Because there are certain prisons where basically you have 1,000 prisoners for one restroom. It's like, damn, that's too much, or, Madagascar only has one, big prison and you got to wait years and years for your time,
Sorry, I don't know if any of you want to provide comments to that, but on the Kenyan question, the Kenyan police, they haven't been deployed to Haiti yet, those conversations. No, they haven't been deployed they haven't. The discussions are there, but they have not been deployed to Haiti. So I'll turn it over to our speakers to address the second question that you had. Could you, the prisons, overcrowding of prisons. I think going back to the point that you made, Nate, about also.
I'm happy. I mean, I think that's absolutely crucial. And I actually think one of the, not the, but a key driver of a lot of the human rights abuses we see in the African continent is an inability to effectively hold and detain people who have committed crimes, and so they get placed in utterly abominable conditions. This was made really clear to me back when I was working more closely on Nigerian politics and tracking the Boko Haram insurgency, when in the very early days of the insurgency, the military detained around 10,000 people they suspected of being affiliated with the insurgency during a major attack. At the time, the Boko Haram was attacking prison systems, so they were already, capacity was already really, really strained. And there was the big attack at Giwa in the northeast, and they put them in a barracks that was meant to hold 300 people. I think, and partially, I think part of the reasoning is that they didn't have any decent intelligence or knowledge of the local population, and they didn't feel like they had any secure facilities where they could detain these people. And it was horrific. I mean, it was one of the major human rights abuses that Nigeria has been accused of in the course of the insurgency. So I think, yes, when we talk about especially dealing with armed conflict in Africa, the police and justice sector get short shrift.
Thank you very much. Ansamani, you've had a question or no?
Thank you very much, and thanks also to Dr. Nat. Dr. Nat, you mentioned something that brings me to ask this question. Of course, in Africa, we know that there's this lack of trust between the population and the security forces, whether the police or the military. So that has been there for so many years. So Meressa, how sure are you that if we implement this policing will bring about lasting peace in Africa? How sure are you?
It's like $1 million question there, Ansamani. Meressa, did you want to provide any comments there on your thoughts?
Well, how sure I am? It is difficult. But if you make something right, so the expectation is things will become right, things will become better. So my argument is, okay, let's make things right, so that the right things brings right and benefits to all. So there is a problem. If you identify the problem, and solving the problem gonna be easy. So the policing aspect, as I mentioned, is not in the discourses, not in the debate. And sometimes it is people are comfortable with it, but they speak about the problems. If you speak about crimes, okay. If you speak about conflicts, okay. So the community policing aspect is a tool that can help solve the problems. So by applying the right tool, it is easy to tackle the problems. Yeah.
Thank you, Meressa. Perhaps along those lines, Nate, there's a specific question here to you. So you recommend international partners support existing initiatives on the ground already. And Meressa has already laid out several gaps. Meressa, you laid out several gaps in the system at the continental level. And you also proposed a few policy recommendations too as well. So how would you propose that international actors prioritize their approach, Nate? How should international partners decide who they work with or prioritize what issues they engage on, or where on the continent they prioritize issues to work on, trying to drive this approach that Meressa is proposing?
Well, I think writ large when it comes to African security challenges, that external bilateral actors, be they the UN, be they European powers, et cetera, should be prioritizing more and more efforts at the regional level, because they are, especially when you talk about responses to conflict, the more kind of collective agreement you have behind a particular response, the more likely it is to succeed. And especially with, I think, some of the challenges the UN has faced in sponsoring peace operations over the past decade, a lot of this coordination and consensus, if it's going to come from somewhere, is going to have to come from actors like the African Union. But I also, and to be clear, I mean, I think Meressa laid a lot of really important kind of capacity gaps that donors right now should be looking at trying to fill. I mean, I think it's a problem that there are, like 5 out of 37 core staff at AFRIPOL, even though I know that they're already doing not bad work. Like I work on cybercrime, and they've helped make a couple of key arrests in some transnational cybercrime related cases. What I will say is I think that and kind of like we see in this framework for the UN assessed contributions resolution, Africans can't be absent. Right? I think it is reasonable to expect external donors to put some amount of funding to support AFRIPOL. I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to put 100%. I think that Africans have both the resources. I had a participant at a program I was running about a year and a half ago, or maybe a year ago, who made this point, I think, really, really eloquently, who said, hey, look, we have struggled for now a little over half a decade to fund the African Union Peace Fund, which was it's supposed to be an African Union fund to support peace operations. They were trying to get it funded up to $400 million. That level was, I think, just attained this year, but 5 years too late. And, he said, don't tell me we can't afford to fund it. We have our leaders who are spending billions of dollars on property in the United States and Europe. If the political will was there to fund a continental peacekeeping architecture, it would be funded. So I do think it's international donors do need to be able to see that Africans are willing to sacrifice or put forward some amount of resources just to show that it is a priority for them.
So Nate, to that point on political will, I think let's go back to the discussion on police here as well, because in many ways we also know that some of the Meressa, I know one of the recommendations you made here was including the African police chiefs in some of the conversations and decision-making processes. But we also know that sometimes some of these political chiefs could also be political appointees that may come to some of these positions with their own political agenda. And very often, not all leaders might be on the same page politically on agreeing on certain issues. So while we see the police as a professional force, or we want to see the police as a professional institution, there are also political challenges. How would both of you propose or recommendations towards addressing this? Are there incentives for political actors or African states to actually prioritize some of the things that you've mentioned here?
It's a good question, okay. Well, two things. One of my points for action, recommended for action is a reform issue. So meaning the reform issue in a sense, the police reform to be an independent, professional, public center, and problem-oriented, to apply problem-oriented policing, accountable. So meaning it is non-partisan. So being non-partisan in a sense should be led by non-partisan, not a politician or politically appointed people just to use the police as a tool. So the reform aspect is one thing, and then having the supranational police institution helps to do this one. How, like, if they have a sort of forum within the continental, that forum can have like a peer review mechanism among themselves. So countries can learn, like, for example, best practices from one country in terms of appointment of a police chief or inspector general, whatever. So based on information sharing, best practice, review mechanism, so it enhances the police organization at national level to be reformed and to have independent and non-partisan. Yes, by looking the current status, the current structures, yes, it is difficult because many countries, they use the police as a tool to suppress oppositions and to suppress activists, those who want changes, those who want democracy, those who want rights, equalities. But through the AU, under the Charter on Governance, Election, and Democracy, by applying that one, the police can play great roles by bringing the police on the discussions of this issue. So gradually, I hope that it will be changed. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to add?
Yeah, the one thing I think the main area I would see as a kind of value add for regional organizations vice international organizations, it's two things. It's to kind of cooperate on cyber or criminal activities that are not being enacted by states. That's sort of Interpol's remit. I think it's probably AFRIPOL's remit. And there, even though there is a lot of state complicity in organized crime in Africa, there's still, I think, a lot of there. One example would be cybercrime. While there certainly is some degree of cybercrime in Africa that is state-sponsored and sponsored by African states, the overwhelming majority, I think, is conducted both by just regular run-of-the-mill criminal groups or organized criminal networks and actors external to Africa. That's, I think, part of why AFRIPOL has prioritized cooperation on cybercrime. You could also see, for example, African cooperation on things like the drug trade, with narco trafficking from Latin America over through Africa to Europe, those kinds of things. I think that's probably if you want quick wins and something that maybe will be relatively easy to sell to heads of state, I would focus on elements of transnational organized crime that are either outside of African borders or that states kind of agree on is a threat and they want to cooperate on. Because, I mean, this is the reality with regional institutions, be they REX or the AU, they don't want to get too far out of line with what the interests of their states are as defined by their leaders. It's a reality. And in so much as you're going to fight corruption, you need to go within the states themselves. I mean, that's part of what's happened in Guinea, right, where there's been a massive fight over the drug trade there that has had, at least over the past decade, I think, led to some marginal improvement, led in part by justice and police and security sector officials.
Thank you very much. Toby?
Yeah, hi. Toby Glucksman. I'm one of the diplomatic fellows here at the Wilson Center and attached to the Africa Group. It just, this is an enormous project. I think it's probably a very worthwhile idea and something that should be done. But it seems like if you're going to get started, you have to begin with baby steps. And where do you begin? Someone pointed out that there were possibly Kenyan peacekeepers in Haiti, which there apparently aren't. But that's not unusual for the UN to have some sort of police element within peacekeeping units. And I'm wondering if now that the African Union is going to get funding from the UN, if that can be sort of a starting point where, we have these sort of regional peacekeeping organizations or whatever they're going to be called, these missions, and then within them, sort of as a starting point, have some police embedded within them, provide training to them, and then send them back, see how that is, and build political will within the different countries throughout Africa for perhaps something larger down the road. I just don't know if that's been anything you've sort of looked into, how the UN has been doing it.
Did you want to respond or comment on that?
Comment.
Sure.
Yeah, even I mentioned one point that the U.S. engagement with the African Union at the strategic level is about funding of AU-led peace operations, peace support operations. And last year, the UN adopted a resolution that the AU-led missions will be funded from the UN. That is from the access contribution funding. So it's already, a resolution is already issued by UN Security Council, which the US was backing that resolution. So meaning The African Union has adopted the approach of multi-dimensional peace support operations, meaning it includes military, civilian, and the police. That is ideally is adopts the UN approach. The problem is in practice. When we recommend this one, so meaning it is the AU will have a strong police component in its intervention on peace and security. So with the usage of the resolution that's already issued, that is the financing from the UN. But that is not the final or the all financing from the UN, but still the African Union must have other options from its own to fund its own activities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very. Okay, 2 questions. Go ahead, sir.
David Caprera with Global Peace Foundation. We're convening in June in Nairobi a Global Peace Leadership Conference, and we've talked about the African family, Ubuntu, the African Renaissance, done convenings with Howard University, but particularly interreligious councils. So my question is, as you strive to build this robust African security policing system, to what extent can that be buttressed by the various manifestations of African Renaissance, Ubuntu, transcending identity conflict? IGAD, I think in the East Africa context, has done a lot with youth marshalling. So to what extent can those civic values and value makers on the continent, hearkening to indigenous traditions, be an ally in the more formal structural things you're proposing?
Thank you very much. We'll take your question as well.
Oh, yeah. So mine was a little different. So I'm not an expert on Africa, but I consider myself an expert on policing. And so one of the things that's really important about policing is, what's the system of rewards and incentives and punishment? Police don't just become professional. They respond to somebody who's directing them. And so if you want trust at the local level, there has to be political authorities that demand that police and reward police for working with local communities. But it seems to me that the African problem is poor heads of state, in which they're giving police a different set of rules and orders, whether it is to maintain dictatorial power, whether it is in terms of, human rights abuse. One of the countries I do know well is Egypt and somewhat Algeria. I mean, these are countries that the police are used to maintain authoritarian rule. And so if you had an African police that was answering to, I guess, an AFRIPOL authority that had certain demands and rewards associated with doing a particular type of policing, it seems to me on cyber policing it's not a big problem because you probably trace leads through technology, but how would they interact with the police at the local level that have been given a different set of incentives and rules to follow?
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll take those 2 questions, and as you respond to the questions, if you could also provide your closing thoughts too as well. Meressa?
Yeah, thank you, Professor and Dave, for those important questions. When I say the supranational police, still the local police need to be reformed, and the supranational is more to empower the local police, the indigenous type of conflict or mechanisms. It's not to take all the responsibilities, but at least to today we are living in a global world. So in this global, also on the aspirations of the African aspirations to integration. So we need to integrate the systems as well, meaning this police must be the system of the integration, it's part of the integration. I agree with you, Professor Kati. The police service, if the police is a reflection of the type of the government, anyway. If in authoritative government, the police is authoritative and brutal. In a democratic government, the police serves the people. So it is a real reflection of the existing governance. That's why if the African Union works on policing aspect, it can improve on the governance aspect. Yes, that's true, but we need to change that one. So just to conclude on my thoughts, the African Union needs a supranational police. And that helps even, like, for example, if there is a need for investigation, the complicated issues that the African Union wants to investigate. And if the member countries are committed to the union, they must give these authorities, and then they must have an independent investigations for complicated issues. So it has many importance and significance for the African Union to achieve its objectives in the Agenda 2063. By saying this, I would like to thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for coming and attending this event. I think we'll continue discussion on this one. And I would like just to thank Dr. Nat for being with us today and give us his insights from Africa. Really, thank you very much. Thank you, Ogi.
Thank you, Meressa.
Thank you.
Nate, did you want to add just anything, please?
I think real quick in response to both of your comments, I think it's important to recognize the actually diversity of policing that exists in Africa and also the diversity of police architectures and forces. I had this conversation with Meressa when he came out to the Africa Center to have a conversation, but I think who the police are and how legitimate they may see really depends not just state to state, but frankly, location to location. The anti-SARS protests in Nigeria was against a specific special anti-robbery squad that was notorious for abuse. I've had some interactions with police in Africa that have been more or less fine, and they're clearly individuals trying to do their jobs. I do think we need to focus on just improving professionalism at a local level within police, whatever that might look like, be it a kind of be it an anti-robbery squad or be it, like, and I know conflict really, really well. You've had like the civilian joint task forces or local militia groups that often form in response to insurgencies. We don't often think of those as police, but in conflict-related environments where there isn't much of an authority to begin with, those groups effectively serve the functions of police and have a degree of legitimacy with the population. So I think when we talk about dealing with police, especially in conflict zones and local police, it's those forces that I think both the AU and the UN are going to have to interact with and build capacity to reliably and effectively accountably serve their people, even if they are sometimes engaging in very, very problematic behavior. So just a nod to, we have to kind of, I think, as Meressa said in his remarks, I mean, appreciate that it's not just about more or less police, it's about having good police, and we already have tactics, tools, techniques, and procedures that help to get us there. So.
Thank you very much, Nate, and thank you, Meressa. Thank you, Meressa, for picking a really interesting topic and a very difficult one too, as well. I'm excited to see what your final policy brief, and also excited that you will continue working on this research when you return to Ethiopia. So please, everyone, join me in thanking Meressa. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, Nate.